Director of the Institute for Communitarian Policy Studies at the George Washington University and has previously held positions at Columbia and Harvard. He served as senior aide to the White House, is a former president of the American Sociological Association and founder of the Communitarian Network. He's author of several acclaimed books, including The Active Society, The Moral Dimension, and Security First for a Muscular Moral Foreign Policy. So, on that note, please join me in welcoming Professor Amitai Etzioni to the lectern. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be back here. You'll find in a moment that there are two reasons I'm particularly awkward. First, Liam Burns is here, and he articulated what I'm supposed to talk about so much better in his communitarian speeches that it's just, no way I can come close. And really, one reason I'm here on my way to the continent is because I was kind of blown away by his speeches. This is before I spent a good part of the last 2 days with him, and he's really a sterling of a public servant. Now, I tried to convince the chair to let Mr. Byrne goes first and for me to follow, which I think still is appropriate. But he told me in a way which reminded me of my German parents, 9. And that was more or less the end of that. I need one more brief introduction, and the only way I can get there quickly is by telling you a not particularly funny joke, but a useful one. There were 2 economists who went to the White House, and when they came out, a beggar said, "Could you give me $3 for a cup of coffee?" And the economist said, "Come on, a cup of coffee doesn't cost $3. And he said, "Oh, you didn't hear the news. There was a freeze in Brazil, and the coffee futures are up." And the economists were very impressed. And they said, "Why don't you come and study economics at our university?" And he said, "I'm a beggar, but I'm no fool." My starting point is a double one. First of all, the time has come, and I choose my words carefully. The time is now to restore the demos part of democracy. We had strong, vibrant communities. And by community, I just don't mean only local communities, but also national communities. If you go to the 1950s, the norms were clear. Crime was very low. Drug abuse was very low. People didn't have to lock their homes or their cars. People knew what was expected of them. People took responsibility. And it was a god-awful society because it discriminated against minorities, discriminated against women, it discriminated against handicapped, it discriminated against gay people. It was a very authoritarian society. So what happened over the decades since then? That there were various liberation movements, women's movement, civil rights movement, gay rights, which attacked the old regime. And they destroyed the old fabric of society as they ought to. I wish they did it earlier. And the progress of transition is not complete, but they went a long way of bringing down the authoritarian, discriminatory society. In the process, they broke down all the old social norms. And that is not our problem. I know very few people, even on the extreme right, who want to go back to the 1950 society. But the question we have not fully confronted is what new norms we are going to share. What is going to replace what the shared basis of good conduct. The reason we need to have this conversation is the moment you have to call in the accountants or the inspectors or the police, you already have social failure. We talk a lot about market failure, but there's no such a thing as social failure. And a good society, most of the people, most of the time, do what's expected of them without being coerced or forced because they believe it's the right thing to do. And if you look at those things which work well, they are where people do take care of their children. Look, I have children. I think those of you who have children know Most of what we do for them is not required by law. The law doesn't say I have to fuss about them, or get up in the middle of the night and see if they're breathing, and so, yeah, you know what I'm talking about, right? It doesn't say I have to support them while they're in college. It doesn't mean when they have their first divorce, they come home with their children, I have to still help them. As you know, adolescence never stops anymore. And so we do it because we feel obligated to our children. When people get Alzheimer, their spouses, 90% of the time, their spouses stay with them to thick and thin. You know that they're going to never be repaid in any shape or form because they think that what they ought to do. That there is no enough supervisor, inspectors, or accountants who could make people do such a challenging assignment if it wasn't that people believe it's the right thing to do. People in most places, at least in my part of the world, smoking in public is not an issue. It's just not done. And I have not seen one time where somebody will light up in public and somebody will say, I'll call the police or the inspector or the bouncer. It's just not done. So that is, I'm trying to give you this the sense, the feel, what a good society is based on, not on policing, not on coercion, not on accountants, but people came together, formed understanding what is right and wrong, and encourage each other to be better than they would be otherwise. We are each other's keeper in that sense. We reward each other for good behavior, and we chastise each other when we are not. I'm not saying there's no room for law, no need for law. We need in the end some underpinning, so when people stray and we will not reach them, we cannot allow the whole thing to unravel, but let people get away when they violently break the norms. But we are better off in social cost, in human cost, in human decency, if we can get together to form shared understandings. And here I want to introduce, sociologists live by creating funny words, I'm going to use as plain English as I can marshal. And I want to talk about something I want to call moral dialogues. Moral dialogues are very different from scientific or factual or logical debates. What happens, and it's something I don't think we pay enough attention to, once in a while, we in effect have a society-wide, national, and increasingly transnational conversation about what's right and wrong. And this almost an annual topic of the year of what we are dialoguing about. And then there's a billion-hour buzz. People talk about it in meetings like this and on the water cooler, in the car and such. And when you're in the middle of those debates, they look very contentious, unconflicted. And if you come 5 years, sometimes longer later, you see something very interesting. Most times, not always, most times, new shared understanding, new shared moral understanding, new norms arise. And second, because people participate in forming them, they become self-enforcing. So, for instance, I'll talk about the United States first because that's the society I'm most familiar with. We have now a debate about gay marriages. It doesn't matter what position you take on it. All I'm saying, if you observe the United States, we are changing as we're talking about it. We suddenly have 6 states which legalized gay marriages, and I think there's nobody in doubt. I think that a few years from now, every place but Texas, I'm sorry, that's a kind of little silly joke, will have civil unions or gay marriages. We have a beginning of a debate about death penalty, which we are very behind you, and we're kind of moving away from it. We had a very intense debate about the war in Iraq until we agreed that it was wrong. And so now to give you other examples of conversations I know you had, for instance, in the 1950s, I don't think there was anyone who had a sense that if you have a moral duty to the environment. It just wasn't on the map. People would throw things into the lakes or into the air, and then nobody thought about it. Anymore, you worry now about what's happening on the other side of the moon. And then I don't have the time to go how we came about it, but we started a conversation, what we owe Mother Earth. And out of this, 2 things came. A shared moral understanding that we have some duties to Mother Earth, We still differ exactly what it entails. But again, I don't know anybody who wants to go back to the way we treated the environment in the 1950s, and it's largely self-implementing. People voluntarily recycle, use this funny paper, and so on and so on. We had a conversation about gender, relationship between men and women. Anyhow, I think by now I succeed in illustrating what I mean. The way whole societies, local communities, and increasingly actually transnational communities can have more conversation, despite as huge as they are, and despite as they're often heated and emotional. At the end of the day, very often, they lead to new shared understanding and a new voluntary enforcement. So what we need now is we need a conversation, and let me close on that before somebody hits a gavel at me, to say we need a conversation about what is the good life. Because too long we measured the good life by how much money we make and how many goods we buy. Now, I want to be very precise here. For people who are poor, who don't have the basic needs of life, they indeed very much need home, food, security, health, education. But as people's income increases, study upon study upon study show there's no additional gain in contentment. When you ratchet up, the Japanese in the period in which their GDP quadrupled, the percentage of Japanese who are happy increased by 2%. We have the same data for the United States. Now, this is not a call to enjoy poverty. It is a call to say once you're out of poverty, that from then on, it's time to ask what makes for a good life. It's particularly important now, as I believe our economic condition is such, that we will not be able to go back, even after this crisis, to what used to be called the good old life of, I use an American example, I feel safer, that we all need inflatable Santa Clauses and plastic pelicans on our front lawn. The question which I think we need to talk about, and the time is ripe, is to ask what makes a good life once your basic creature comforts are secure. And I think we'll find two answers. One, and again, I turn to MP Burns' speeches, in community, in spending more time with others, with our children, with our friends, with our extended family, with our neighbors, as volunteers or just members of another. We'll find it richly rewarding when we have stable, positive relationship with other people. And second, what I'll, just to give it a name to save time, what are called transcendental pursuits. Reflection, reading, music, praying, some of us it's okay, and all things which are not labor intensive and not capital intensive. So I appreciate endlessly your tolerance, and I hope that we can join this conversation here and in other places. Thank you.
Please join me in welcoming Liam to give his address. Thank you.